When Hitler came into power, were your family and you supporters of Hitler?
Yeah.
Dad and me love a whole lot of history. We could be the greatest team that the world has ever seen. Dad and me love a whole lot of history.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Dad
and Me
Love History. Today we are joined by a very special guest, a 16-year-old historian called Jaxon Hekkenberg, a high school kid from Toronto, Canada, who's doing remarkable work as a historian. Hi Jaxon, how are you doing?
I'm great, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. So pleased that you could join Dad and Me Love History. I think this is going to be really interesting. Today we're going to be talking about Jaxon's interviews that he's made, and also we're going to talk about the big question: how can young people save history? And you're going to find out more about how Jaxon's doing that.
Can you tell us about what you're doing regarding World War II history, Jaxon?
So for the past 9 months, I've been interviewing World War II veterans, mainly because I came across a news article in the summer and I saw that there weren't going to be any World War II vets alive by 2045. And I didn't think much of it until I started working at a nursing home. And I was interested, and I was in, I can't think of the word.
That's all right, we can
Introduced.
We can edit that, sorry. Go on.
I was introduced to a few World War II veterans there, and one in particular told me that there weren't many Bomber Command veterans around, and that really got to me. And from there, I started writing to veterans and interviewing them, trying to capture their stories, because he told me so many stories from the war, and I was fascinated by them. And there were kids my age, 16, 15 years old, that served for that, and they didn't have to serve.
Wow, no, that's really interesting. It's amazing how that experience has got you involved in this amazing project.
How did you find all these veterans in the first place?
So like I said, I first started writing to them, and I wrote around 2,200 letters, 2,300 letters.
Wow, that's a lot.
And not many of them got back to me, which my parents explained because of their advanced age. And like they're 95 to over 110 years old.
Wow. And
most of them can't write anymore. So I got a few letters back, got around 200 letters back, which I put into a portfolio and wrote their stories underneath the letters. And from there, I contacted them through that, and they introduced me to their friends, and that's how I first got in contact with them. Then I started doing some reading and watching YouTube videos about specific veterans, and I wanted to get in contact with them. So I'd go and contact journalists. When I first started, they didn't really want to help me, but as I figured out how to talk my way through getting contacts, they really wanted to help me from then on, and I introduced myself much better. And before, I had severe social anxiety, which now, talking to all of these people, I don't feel anxious anymore.
Wow, well, that's such a brilliant personal story, as well as the kind of the history side of things. And those things that you were mentioning there, I've written a few history articles for magazines and newspapers, and people I don't know will contact me because they've read it online or whatever, and they want to find out more about it. And so I can imagine how that worked for you. So do you think one day that you were talking about how you've got like a portfolio, like a file of paper of the letters, and I guess you've also got lots of folders on your computer, sound files and video files from the interviews you've made. So you're building like an archive. And do you think one day, do you have an idea of what you might do with it, whether you might put it on a web page or into a podcast series or what?
So I've been offered by multiple people to put it on their YouTube channels, and I'm happy to do that, but I also want to turn it into my own YouTube channel, and I've started editing videos because these stories need to be heard. And another way I'm going to get it heard is I'm planning on making a website when I do get a little bit more money.
And if people are listening to this now and they want to help you, or if they want to ask you questions, how do you want them to contact you? We can say they can contact us through Dad and Me. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Also, our webpage, dadandmelovehistory.com, has contact details. But do you want to add any of your own?
That would probably be the best way to do it.
Great. Okay. So yeah, listener, if you want to contact Jaxon, maybe you know a World War II veteran who he may possibly be able to interview, or maybe you've got some other information that might help him, or you want to know more, then just reach out to Dad and Me Love History through Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or our webpage, dadandmelovehistory.com, and we will get your messages to Jaxon and put you guys in touch.
We love history. We love history, baby. We love history.
So next we're going to hear from some World War II veterans themselves.
Yeah, and Jaxon hasn't only interviewed people who fought on the Allied side. And by the way, Jaxon, correct me if I'm wrong, but I gather you've interviewed at least 50 or 60 World War II veterans. He's also interviewed a war veteran who was in the German army during World War II. His name is Manfred, and he lives in Canada, but he was born and brought up in Germany. And before the war, his family supported Hitler, although they changed their minds later. But he was still at high school when the war started, but he'd left school before the war finished, so he had to grow up fast.
It's early 1945. The Russians are pushing German troops into a retreat on the east side, and the US, Canadian, and British troops are pushing the Germans from the west. Everyone knows Germany will lose the war, and Manfred, who is just a teenager, has just been forced into the German army.
And then, while I was introduced into that group of soldiers, they didn't even have decent clothing. And the gun I was put in my hand was a captured gun from the French, which were lousy guns, by the way. They could go off sometimes without even pulling the trigger.
So we heard there Manfred, when he first joined the army, this is right at the end of 1944, or the beginning of 1945, the German army were already virtually beaten. They didn't have the proper equipment. They were lucky if they could get any weapons at all, some of the soldiers, and they would be ones that had been captured from the enemy more often than not.
On one occasion, Manfred thought he was about to lose his life. Let's listen.
Before the war ended, and we were off duty, or whatever you call it. So we were close to May then, and the sun was shining beautiful, and we were about 500 people on a big meadow, and everybody took off his jacket and everything, sunning, and here come those 3 American planes, and they came just like that. Oh, we thought, oh my gosh, if they start shooting, thanks heaven. They did not, they just flew over. Maybe they knew already that the war was over, you know.
So that incident obviously happened near the end of the war with enemy planes, from the Manfred's German point of view, the enemy planes swooping overhead, swooping down as though they were about to start machine gunning these soldiers, which included Manfred, who were just taking a break, lying in the sun. So in this third clip from Manfred, he comes even closer to death.
On the way home, and here comes this a long street that I'm on, that we are on marching, and there was practically nobody else there marching than the 2 of us. And here comes this Jeep, and That scared the hell out of me. And they were the British, and they stopped the jeep. There were 4 people. Thanks heaven there was 1 officer and 3 young people, I would say, about in the, a little bit over the teens years, you know. And they were pushing us into the ditch, and we had to empty our knapsack. And they were so happy to find alcohol. They were drunk anyways, one of them in particular. And that one was waving a gun and said, "Let's shoot them." And of course, thanks heaven, the officer calmed him down. They took our nice whiskies or brandies, whatever it was, and they disappeared.
So at the end of the war, it was a situation where you didn't know on the losing side how you would be treated. But Manfred was lucky there. There was an officer in charge of the soldiers. I think they were British soldiers, he said, didn't he? And that officer stopped those soldiers from shooting him and his comrade in the German army. So Jaxon, most people who were on the side of Nazi Germany in World War II did not want to be interviewed afterwards. And Manfred and his family supported Hitler, at least at the beginning. So how did you track Manfred down, and why do you think he agreed to be interviewed?
Well, this is actually a really funny story. So I was at my English tutor's house or apartment, and she was helping me with an assignment. And we saw this old man walking by, which was Manfred. And she said, "Oh, that's Fred. I saw you on TV. I think Fred was in the German army during the war. Would you like me to give him your phone number?" And I'm like, "Of course."
Wow.
So he gave me a phone call, and it just went on from there. And he lives 5 minutes away from me, which is unbelievable. And he's moving soon, so that's sad. He's moving to a retirement home, and I actually like talking to him. I would talk to him every week or two, and it was just good. We just had good conversations about the war and all that type of stuff, what he did after the war.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think it's really also a credit to him, because the easy thing to do would just be to stay silent. If you're on the losing side and you're obviously on Hitler and the Nazis side during the war, that's obviously what most people did. But he's very honest. Obviously, I've listened to the full interview that you sent me that you did with him, and we'll hear one at the end of the pod. We'll hear just one final clip from Manfred. But for now, I know you've also interviewed a soldier who liberated, that means, listener, set free, people who were in concentration camps, like big outdoor prisons at the end of World War II when the Nazis were finally defeated. So you interviewed an American soldier called Sergeant Guy Prestia, and he and his Thunderbird division fought in Italy and in southern France and then across Germany, where eventually they came upon Dachau concentration camp in the south of Germany. And Dachau was the first concentration camp the Nazis ever built. And Guy Prestia, who we're going to hear from, was among the very first soldiers to reach there and to meet the people who were still imprisoned there and to set them free. Parts of your interview with Sergeant Prestia were perhaps too sad for our youngest listeners to listen to, and what we're talking about now also relates to the Holocaust, the persecution of Jewish people in World War II, which, listener, we covered in episodes 28 and 29, and we did that in a way where even children 9 years old, there should be nothing there to give them nightmares. And we interviewed a Holocaust survivor who had an incredible attitude and positivity about him. But anyway, in this clip, Sergeant Prestia describes meeting and helping survivors of the concentration camp at Dachau.
So anyway, we weren't allowed to give them any food because our medics said that these people were so undernourished that just the food would probably kill them. So we were allowed to give them two things. We were allowed to give them cigarettes and hardtack candy, and we had them in our pack. And I was never a smoker, so whenever I got those 6 cigarettes every day, I would trade them to my buddies, and I would give them my cigarettes, and they gave me their candy. And it was good for me to have all that in my pack, because when we went through a lot of towns that got bombed real bad and the people were evacuating the city, these little kids would follow us behind us, and they wanted candy, and I always had candy in my pack to feed these kids, and you get a nice smile on their face. Yeah.
So if he and the American troops had given lots of food straight away to people who'd been starving for months, their stomachs would have thrown it back up. They would have been sick straight away. So that's why he was limited on what he could do there. James?
So did ordinary Germans know about the horrible concentration camps? Did a German soldier like Manfred know the camps existed?
Now that is one thing, that people don't believe. We never knew anything. Not anything of that. When that came up, we said, no, that is not possible. How German people would do that? No way. But it happened.
So that was our final clip. It's really amazing that you've got these interviews, Jaxon. Despite being only 16, you're doing more than almost anyone else I know to save history by collecting evidence, producing historical records of these war veterans' experiences.
Can you think of anything our young listeners can do to save a bit of history?
Well, if you have any parents or grandparents that survived the war, ask them their stories, because most likely they'll be happy to tell you their stories. But every once in a while, they'll keep some details private depending on your age and depending on how impactful it was to them. But now they're getting to an age where they want to tell their stories, because when they're gone, no one's going to be able to hear their stories, and they don't want it to happen again. And we don't want it to happen again. So just talk to your grandparents or your great-grandparents and ask them about their stories and how the war impacted them.
And that's really, really good advice, listener. I do that with my students as a history teacher. Yeah, and the listeners will maybe probably already heard my Polish grandmother who escaped from Poland as a 16-year-old in 1939. And yeah, my 16-year-old granny made it out of southern Poland into Romania, which was neutral at that point, and made it to France, stayed there for a few months, and the Nazis invaded, and eventually she made it to Britain. So, and I wrote a historical novel called A Chance Kill that's based very closely on, at least the beginning of the novel is based on her story. So yeah, talk to your grandparents, great-grandparents, find out their stories. So thank you so much for joining us on Dad and Me, Jaxon.
Thank you, Jaxon.
Oh, it's been great to have you on. Thank you.
So that's almost it from Dad and Me.
Yeah, as usual, listen out for the little bonuses that we put on the pod after the theme music, and get in touch with us on
Instagram
and Facebook
and Twitter.
And please share our podcast on social media and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
Bye for now.
From Dad
and me,
Jaxon,
love history.
Dad and me love a whole lot of history. We could be the greatest team that the world has ever seen. Dad and me love a whole lot of history.
Here are some questions to see how well you understood today's episode.
Number 1. What is Jaxon doing to save history?
2. What challenges did Jaxon face when trying to interview war veterans?
Number 3. Why is it unusual for a German World War II veteran to give interviews?
4. What evidence have you heard from Manfred that suggests that German soldiers were not always bad and that British or Allied soldiers were not always good?
Number 5. Why do you think the Nazis tried to keep the concentration camps secret, even from the Germans?
And finally, number 6. What could you do to help save some history?
Can you hear me?
Ah, yeah, gotcha. Great. Fantastic. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks. Yeah, a bit warmer than you are. What did you say temperature was?
Negative 38
Oh, negative
Celsius.
Wow, minus 38 Celsius. I've been skiing in Canada in about minus 20, but not minus 38. Wow. I bet those journalists, if they were smart, they would have soon realised that you're a story for them as well. If they want to write an article about you, there'd be, because obviously some have. I've seen articles about you online. So yeah, that's amazing. Before we listen to our first clips, I've also heard that you've got some family who were in Europe during World War II, but I don't know much more than that.
So my grandparents on my mother's side were born in Poland and Germany. But my grandfather, who was born in Germany, unfortunately was displaced during the war, and his family was actually from Poland, and they were kicked out of the village by the Nazis. And he ended up, or his family ended up having to flee to Germany, and they were put in a displaced persons camp. And after the war, he was born in the displaced persons camp.
Wow.
On my dad's side.
So sorry, his family were considered by the Nazis to be Polish, and that's why they were pushed around like this and put in camps. Is that right?
Yes.
Right, go on.
So kind of like a refugee camp they were put into.
Yeah.
And then they were forced into one.
Yeah.
And on my dad's side, his mom's dad, I believe, owned a newspaper company and would print newspapers for the German army and also for the Dutch resistance. So he would feed information to the Dutch resistance that wasn't getting revealed to the public.
Wow. Well, that's a very risky but brave thing to do. Amazing.
And my grandfather, before he passed away, I never got to meet him, but my cousins told me stories of my uncle, who's a retired history teacher, told me that my grandfather, he was walking down a street and he was carrying newspapers, which he wasn't related to the resistance, or his family wasn't related to the resistance, but he was carrying newspapers and a German soldier came up behind him and pointed a gun at him, which it would be scary for a kid his age.
For sure. And he has no idea. I guess he had no idea why or what was going on.
No, because there's a language barrier.
Yeah, of course. Wow. You must be making plans for studying history after school, right?
I want to be a doctor.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's a brilliant thing to do, obviously, as well. And the great thing about history is you can always do history, right, in life, like you're proving now. It's brilliant. Oh, that's great. Thank you, Jaxon. I have a feeling that this won't be the last time we talk to each other. We'll see each other. I don't know if you've looked back through all our episodes. I'd say we've done World War II as a topic, or the Holocaust, or something to do with World War II more than anything else. And a lot of our listeners like it. That's why we keep doing it. They send us messages, and I also get to see the statistics from the downloads, and those episodes are listened to a lot. So we've had well over 100,000 downloads, and obviously our listenership is kind of increasing all the time. Me. Bang.